Hello, welcome to this session. The title of this session is Akira Kurosawa and Seven Samurai. Akira Kurosawa, the acclaimed filmmaker from Japan, is the first name from Asia to be heard in the innately Western ears of film pundits across the globe. As an auteur of international cinema, he could redefine the limits of visual culture, crossing the Western syntax of cinema. Since the advent of Rashomon in Venice Film Festival in 1951 to the days of digitization of films now, he is called the warrior with a camera for his distinctive filmmaking processes and inimical oeuvre. Deeply conscious of the cultural roots, he took Japan's folktales, drama, traditional performance, and music into his films, and the very idea of adaptation took a new meaning by his experiments with literature. His adaptation of Western canonical texts like Shakespeare's Macbeth or Gorky's The Lower Depths might be the best example to prove Antonio Gramsci's notion of cinema as an adaptation of nation-state. Kurosawa reconstructed Japan that was destroyed in the World War II in his films and gave a new direction to the art of cinema by bridging the gap between Western cinematic sensibility and Japanese cultural landscape. Learning objectives: to enable the learner to understand Akira Kurosawa as an auteur, to comprehend the distinctive features of Kurosawa's filmmaking practices, to understand the filmography of Akira Kurosawa, and to comprehend and critically respond to Kurosawa's film Seven Samurai. Akira Kurosawa was born in Tokyo on 23 March 1910. His father was a former military officer turned an athletic instructor at the Imperial Army's Toyama Academy. His mother was from an affluent merchant family. I quote, "My mother was a very gentle woman," Kurosawa said, "but my father was quite severe," unquote. His brother Heigo was very much interested in traditional storytelling, kodan, which featured tales of samurai and often involved intricate, stylized swordplay. He used to take young Akira to movies, and Heigo later became a narrator for silent movies of the time. But when the synchronous sound practices were adopted by cinema, he lost his job and eventually set out a trip to the mountains and committed suicide. This incident made a great impact on Akira's mind. He decided to learn painting and enrolled in the Doshusha School of Western Painting in 1927. But he could not achieve his dream of becoming a painter due to financial difficulties. Katsuhiro Yamamoto, the towering director of the time, hired Akira as an apprentice assistant director at the age of 26, and Kurosawa worked 7 years with him. Finally, in 1943, he was given the chance to direct his first film, Shanshiro Sugata, Judo Saga, a typical judo fight film that became a box office hit. Following his directorial debut, films like The Most Beautiful, a blending of documentary and dramatic scenes about Japanese women factory workers, and Sanshiro Sugada Part 2, another huge hit, established Akira Kurosawa's name in Japanese cinema industry. But his mind was after the style of Roberto Rossellini and Vittorio De Sica, and he wanted to portray something more real, on reel, and create aesthetically more beautiful films. In 1946, Kurosawa directed No Regrets for Our Youth, a film about persecutions in post-war Tokyo by the Japanese right wing. I quote, "It was the first film in which I had something to say and in which my feelings were used," unquote, Kurosawa said later. Drunken Angel 1948, which tells the story of a drunkard doctor who works for the poor, depicted the life in the slums of Japan and received critical acclaim. The recurrent appearance of a sump between the segments with associated symbols like a broken doll pointed to the decadence of modernity and the human plight. Kurosawa's film The Quiet Duel 1949 is based on Kikuta Kazuo's play The Abortion Doctor. Kurosawa's movie, The Story of a Stray Dog 1949, centers on a young homicide detective, Murakami, and his quest to recover his stolen handgun. This film illustrates the commodity fetishism of capitalist society from an obviously Marxian perspective. Kurosawa's Scandal 1950 is a social protest film condemning the irresponsibility of yellow journalism. All these films mentioned here made the oeuvre for Rashomon that changed the history of Japanese film. Rashomon was an adaptation of Akutagawa's short story In a Groove, which was a retelling of the 11th century Japanese folk tale from multiple perspectives. The story comprises of 3 confessions by a bandit, the wife, and the husband, each one contradicting the other 2 confessions.
あの死骸を最初に見つけたのは確かにこの私でございます。はい。確か何か見えなかった。何もございません。出会いました。そう。3日前の昼下がりでした。場所は関山から山科へ参ろうという途中でございます。
そう紺の水管を着た男は 私を手ごめにしてしまう。
The polyphony of the story is befitting to convey the idea of multiple reality and multiple truths. Kurosawa added another character, a woodcutter, as an eyewitness and wrote the screenplay himself. I quote, "During that time, the gate was growing larger and larger in my mind's eye. I was location scouting in the ancient capital of Kyoto for Rashomon, my 11th century period film. The Dai management was not very happy with the project. They said the content was difficult and the title had no appeal. They were reluctant to let the shootings begin. Day by day, as I waited, I walked around Kyoto and the still more ancient capital of Nara a few miles away, studying the classical architecture. The more I saw, the larger the image of Rashomon Gate became in my mind," unquote, wrote Kurosawa in his autobiography, Something Like an Autobiography, 1983. Despite the negative reviews at home, the film received unprecedented acclaim abroad and soon became a classic in the history of world cinema. A close analysis of the filmography of Kurosawa reveals certain distinctive signature styles and practices followed by him. His mastery over an impeccable and excellent registering of Japanese topography through a well choreographed cinematography has to be noted first of all. The pace of visual idiom followed by Kurosawa ranges from the extreme slow motion to naturalistic rhythm to high level fast pace. Kurosawian slow motions are intended at portraying consequences of previous actions in detail. Each of Kurosawian character normally does not cross over into another character's cloak. The frame transition, known as swipe, is one of the noted cinema stylistics frequently followed by Kurosawa. Kurosawa always worked in close collaboration with his technical team, including cinematographers, editors, actors, and sound composers, etc., thereby forming a special cluster of artists and technicians, which was later labeled the Kurosawa Gumi or the Kurosawa Group. Violence, with many manifestations of it like personal, institutional, class, psychological, gender, is another prominent feature which can be detected across Kurosawa's filmic oeuvre. A consistent thematic thread which could be explored across many of Kurosawa's film is heroism. Kurosawa creates cinematic plots which demand the necessity of characters who are heroic, and these characters establish their heroic status primarily to protect an otherwise unheroic community. Film critic David Desser says that, I quote, "According to the cliche, Kurosawa is Japan's most Western director," unquote, and Seven Samurai is probably the most often remade, reworked, referenced film in all of cinema's history, unquote. Genre-wise, Kurosawa can be called as the master of Eastern Western, as commented by David Desser. Akira Kurosawa's most politically significant cinematic grand-scale epic arrived in 1954 with the release of Seven Samurai. Plot-wise, it depicts the successful armed resistance of farmers of a mountain village under the leadership of 7 hired samurais against 40 heavily armed bandits on horseback who often raid the village to loot crops. Creation of a disciplined and confident nation out of a different, diffident, defenseless, disorderly agrarian community becomes the major political subtext of Seven Samurai. The revival of Japan, as a self-confident nation after the catastrophic nuclear demolition in 1945 could be the political mission Kurosawa was trying to undertake with his film. In order to recharge the political will of contemporary post-nuclear 20th century Japan, Kurosawa relies on a particular episode in Japanese cultural history of the 16th century during the Sengoku era. Seven Samurai is a cinematic political parable throughout, structured to resurrect the nation's honor internationally. Frederick Kaplan says that, I quote, "In Seven Samurai, Kurosawa uses cinematic technology to explore the dialectic between time and history. He deals cinematically with the past in order to deal ideologically with the present and future, and more specifically with class struggle and the role of intellectuals in that struggle," unquote. The sheer length of the film, running into almost 3 hours and 30 minutes, justifies the epic claim of Seven Samurai. The length of the film itself is a directorial statement which makes it clear that in order to regain the nation's lost honor, the Japanese have to understand their cultural history in detail, which is a time-consuming effort. Therefore, Seven Samurai could not be designed as a crisp, capsular cinematic text. The film is all about the conversion of a fragile agrarian hamlet into a powerful military bastion for defense and survival of a community of people. In other words, Seven Samurai depicts the militarization of a mass. It also has to be noted that during the process of equipping the agrarian community to fight back, the same community's rich tradition of militarism gets rediscovered, the rediscovery of which boosts the morale of the community further. The rediscovery of the community's valiant past is a historical validation of their ability to defend and attack. A samurai is a warrior come administrator of noble birth who serves a master, often a feudal lord. Samuraiship comes with a higher class position and a higher administrative rank. When the master discharges him of his duty and rank, he becomes a ronin, a declassed, jobless man. Therefore, the ronins in Kurosawa's films are to be equated with the proletarian farmers for the protection of whom they reach the village. In the film, actually, there are no samurais, but only 7 ronins. Kanbei, who takes up the command of the fight, Katsuhiro, the youngest of the samurai and a disciple of Kanbei, Kikuchiyo, the most funny but active of all samurais, who is not initially accepted by the group as a samurai because of suspicion on his claims of noble birth, Gorobei, who makes a unique flag which has got 6 circles, a triangle and a syllable ta, which represents the village. Heihachi, who loses his life while raiding a bandit hamlet, Kyuzo, who seizes the enemy's gun raiding their village, and Shichiroji, an old companion of Kanbei. They are all masterless, jobless, hungry ronins, hired on the advice of the village elder who was a miller by profession. Professor Bert Cardulo of University of California at Berkeley makes the following comment on the deeper philosophical subtext of the film Seven Samurai. I quote, The force of circumstance is clearly at work throughout The Seven Samurai, but the film is hardly a treatise on man's helplessness before circumstances, his dwarfing by it. The art of the film, for me, is in man's playing out his destiny before circumstances. At the same time, circumstances seems to engulf him. The farmers fight and die for their freedom. The samurai defend the farmers no differently than they would defend themselves, nobly and fiercely. The bandits fight to the last man against, in the end, unbeatable odds, apparently forgetting that their initial objective in storming the village was to seize the farmers' crops. It's their own honor and fighting ability that have become the question. We see the ironies in the situation, but the farmers, the samurai, and the bandits do not, or they do only in passing. They act and in action are ennobled. That perhaps is the sense in which this truly an action or epic film. Action does not occur for its own sake or for the sake of mere spectacle. Instead, it ennobles it. Unquote. During the development of the cinematic plot, the village girl, Shino, who was ordered by her father to transvestise as a boy to escape from the sex-lust samurais, develops a romantic and physical relationship with Katsuhiro, one of the samurais.
米の飯だ。いいから食え。
だって
俺も力士にもらって食べてみた。冷えばかりの飯を。とても食えん。さあ食え。
The film implies an impregnation of Shino, which suggests the sowing of the aggressive samurai's biological seed within an otherwise passive rural populace of the village for their protection from further external threats in future. Woman as a protector of a community's or family's honor and community's racial purity is also another subtext of Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai is another war film which also portrays woman as a commodity which could be protected or possessed to maintain the patriarchal male honor and sexual lust in times of conflicts. Anne Bilson of the British Broadcasting Corporation describes a few reasons for how and why Kurosawa's Seven Samurai topped the BBC's 2018 Culture Poll list of 100 foreign language films ever made. I quote, "After all, this meticulous scene setting, the film's final hour and a half unfurls in an escalating series of skirmishes. The cinematic battle, drenched by the torrential rain, is a miracle of brilliantly choreographed chaos. Combatants running hither and thither through the mud, galloping horses, spears, arrows, and the occasional bullet, all filmed with multiple cameras which insert the audience into the thick of the action. We always know who is who, where everyone is, what they are doing, and thanks to an infographic style banner, exactly how many bandits are left to kill at any given moment. There are casualties among the samurai too, and because we have come to know them, every death hits hard." Unquote. Kurosawa aesthetically paces Seven Samurai in different tempos at different times. The initial slow pace suggests the slow, passive rural life pattern. However, the final fast tempo of the film suggests the re-energized vigor of the militarized, disciplined collectivism of subnationality. Surgical preemptive military strikes at the enemy camps as a defense strategy is also portrayed by Kurosawa, making the film a textbook for strategic army building. maintenance and management, command control, developing military cartography, bastion fortification, guerrilla warfare, and troop deployment. Kurosawa's cinematic prowess as a film editor is also revealed in Seven Samurai. Continuity editing is consistently followed in this film with lots of cut to reverse cut, eye-line matching cuts, wiping transitions and establishment shots. To sum up, Akira Kurosawa's iconic movie Seven Samurai, a historic drama in epic scale, cinematically rebuilds the nation Japan, which was devastated in large scale in the Second World War. Thank you for watching.